Dear students in EU Kenkyu and EU Kenkyu Nimon 2021, welcome back on YouTube to our second lecture on the European Union. It's titled A Short History of Europe and the EU. First, let me thank you for your homework mails. I received 35. There is 44 still standing out. Please do that assignment. I give you time until the last day of the Golden Week. So you have a little bit more time to watch the first lecture as well as this one, the second. There were a few hints. Thank you very much. Some of you mentioned that the videos didn't play in the presentation. I will look into that. We have no videos today, but I will always try to give you the URLs so that you can see the videos on YouTube besides the presentation in case it doesn't work. Then several of you said the English captions, CC captions, subtitles on YouTube helped a lot and worked pretty well. Please try it. If my English is not so easy to understand, try to use subtitles. Stop, play back, listen again, and I'm sure you will understand more. The third aspect is some of you asked me, can't we have the PowerPoint presentation for our files? Yes, you can. The trouble is I can't post them on web class because they're too big. The files are really huge. But I have sent them by WeTransfer, free cloud transfer, to some of you who asked for it. If you want the two lectures in this format, please send me a mail with your mail address and I will send you the WeTransfer. And now let's get back to what you said in 2 weeks ago in our very first lecture. We asked you which lecture format would you prefer, and you can see the result is very even and leaves us a little bit confused, like this gentleman here. So what shall we do? There is 10 of you who prefer Taiman as much as possible, 29 who want to go remote. That's all online and digital. That's a quite largest number. But 18 want a mixture of live classes and some online. And then there were other ideas like hybrid. Hybrid, however, is difficult for us to achieve because the group is so large and we get very little technical support from other staff. So hybrid is not the preferred option on our side. But I think what we will do a lot of online for now, and then have some live classes if possible. I will show you what we are thinking about this in a moment. But first, we also asked your areas of interest. Which topics would you like to hear? There was quite a few people on educational policies. Also the Erasmus program and the study abroad opportunities in the European Union were mentioned in your mails pretty often. So we will do this. Immigration and EU citizenship, yes. Alberto Sensei will present two classes actually on this topic, and I will try to talk about LGBTIQ policies for lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender, intersexual, and I forgot the Q for now. Then 6 points, inside the big machine, how does the EU work? Look inside, how does it actually work? That'll be my job. I'll try to explain that, and if we have time, we also want to pick up European films. Other topics, France and Germany, we will touch upon that in the history class today. More arts and cultures, if possible, we want to do that, and we will have one class especially on France in the European Union by Miyazato Sensei. And policies on language, actually go together with the educational policies, and that's Miyazato Sensei's field, I think. And we have a few more topics. I think there were only 2 points given to European information technology, and especially the Green Deal, the green initiatives. However, we will take it up in a lecture because it's so important from a European point of view. The Green Deal has so much to do with our future. Let's talk about it in the lecture. Okay, finally, you talked about religion and employment. At least the role of religion will be mentioned in today's lecture by me. That's the schedule for EU Kenkyu. It's also posted on web class. Please have a look on web class. Everything I have talked about now is on web class. You can see the schedule next week or the week after next Golden Week. Here is 2 classes by Miyazato Sensei, Education and Language. Then there'll be 2 classes by Sakai Sensei on Immigration and Citizenship, me with a big machine. And here, this is actually where we would love to do Taimen classes, a simulation play, a project, not a formal lecture, but something where you can get active in groups. And the topic we are considering is this one, China, the big challenge for the EU and for Japan in 2 days. China obviously is an ascending, growing power, not just in the Pacific, but in the entire world. And the EU states individually and the EU as a whole are struggling to decide which is the best politics towards China. And I think it's a question that Japan also faces. So we want to work on that with you. Here on July the 7th, we really hope we can get a guest lecture from Osaka. Then we got the LGBTIQ, Greece, the Green Initiatives. And during the last week here, we do a general revision. We will be offering a general revision to prepare for the exam, and we want it on August the 4th, not the 11th, which we think is really very late, almost into summer holidays. If possible, we want to finish this class on August the 4th. You can check this out on web class. Also, possible updates. And now let's get started with the short history of Europe and the European Union. I will be talking about several historical points. We start with Europe and the Roman Empire, Roma Teikoku, and then we have the classical inheritance. When the Roman Empire vanished, what was left, what remained of the Romans in Europe? We move on to the period around 800, when a new European empire was reformed, the Empire of Charlemagne, as he's called in France, Karl der Große, in German, Carlos Magnus in Spanish, or Charles the Great in English. Talking about medieval culture across Europe, and then the early modern and modern periods, very roughly, we don't have that much time, what major changes occurred and what relevance do they have, what happened in the 20th century, which started with the dark side, World War I and World War II, 2 great shocking experiences to Europeans, which led to desperation and Cold War. Europe around 1950 was not a pleasant place to be, but then a new idea emerged, a united Europe. Let's have a sort of European Union. We will talk about that. And then the development and characteristics of the EU in the 50 and the 70 years that followed after that. And there'll be a short homework in the end of today's lecture. This is Europe 2,300 years ago, in the year 300 before Christ, roughly. And we see there are no countries as we know them. There's the Roman Republic, centered around Rome in Italy. There are several kingdoms and city-states in Greece. And then we only have population people like the Celts, which live in a lot of places. We have the Iberians here, and the area where Iberians and Celts mix is inhabited by the Celt-Iberians. We have a large group of German people, Germans, Germanic people, Scandinavians, which are related, the Baltic people, and then Slavs. That's also a large group of people, and so on and so forth. Europe at that time doesn't look very much like it does look today. We move on to the heyday of the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire was the strongest and biggest 1,800 years ago, around 200 AD. And you see, the Roman Empire has spread. It covers most of Europe now. It covers what is Spain, France, England. It only covers part of the Benelux countries and Germany. Most of what is Germany today is not part of the Roman Empire, but here Austria, Switzerland, Italy, the Balkan Peninsula, Turkey, all part of the Roman Empire. What did the Greeks and the Romans actually leave to Europe when the Roman Empire vanished about 1,500 years ago? I'm talking about the Western Roman Empire, of course. Well, there is philosophy and theater, which are Greek ideas. The very words, philosophia, theater, that's Greek language. Then we have architecture, the whole idea of having city squares, hirova, or stadiums for sports, or even apartment blocks. The Romans had danshi jutaku, several floors high. All that in architecture is mostly Roman and partly Greek. We have the modern law and justice system, which is more or less based on Roman law. That applies to Japanese law system as well, at least in part. Then we have the concept of politics, which is Greek. Politeia is a Greek word. It means the community of everybody. Democracy, the government by the people, is also Greek concept. Dictatorship is actually Roman. The Romans initiated limited dictatorship. The idea of an empire and having a Roman Empire, well, that was reborn in the year 800 and lasted over 1,000 years. So that was a very powerful concept, to have one emperor being lord over many kings and lesser people. The idea of the Olympic Games is actually Greek, as you are all aware, I'm sure. A group of languages, the Romance languages, are based on Latin, the language of Rome. These languages include Italian, obviously, also French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and a few smaller languages. And we have architecture. That's a Greek word again, although the Romans really excelled at building. They were great builders. Mathematics, engineering, all that. Mostly Roman inheritance. And finally, we owe to the Greeks and Romans, we owe wine. Wine production really started in antiquity. And the Romans went to many countries, to France, to Spain, to parts of Germany, and they brought wine because the Romans who went there, soldiers and administrators, settlers, they were all thirsty. They all wanted to drink wine, so wine spread all over Europe, even to the south of England. Here we have the picture when the Western Roman Empire vanished around 1,600, 500 years ago. We still have a Roman Empire here, That's the Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Byzance, Constantinople in the east. And here we have a completely different pictures. You don't see the word Celts or Slavs any longer. Instead, you see the names of different tribes. Most important tribes, or you may say people, because these were large groups: the Franks, the Burgundians, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, Suevi, and the Vandals in North Africa. What had happened? There was huge pressure here coming from the east, especially from the Huns, an eastern, very aggressive Asiatic people. They put pressure on the Slavs. The Slavs moved on, and the Germans, the Germanic people, started to overrun this. The River Rhine and the River Danube were the borders of the Roman Empire, and the Romans couldn't defend that any longer. The pressure became too great. The empire collapsed, and the German people went across Europe and settled down in many places. So this doesn't have much to do with modern countries, except for the names, of course. Franks, you have that in France, or Frankreich, as it's called in German, which is even closer to Franks. The Burgundians, that's of course Burgundy, La Bourgogne, that's a part of region of eastern France. Suevi, that Schwaben, this people actually moved back here in this area in southern Germany, where the region is called Schwaben today, and so on and so forth. We jump another 300 something years ahead. Now you can see the Franks have really won out. The Franks have proved the most successful, the biggest of all these people, and they have established an empire which was in this year 814 divided between the three sons of the dead king, or emperor actually. And you can now see, that's quite interesting, you can see Western Frank Empire, which is of course much of the western half of France these days. Then you have the Eastern Frank Empire, and here you see names like Bayern, Alamanien, Sachsen, which are of course even now regions and parts of Germany, or Aquitaine or Gascogne in France. What's different here is now we have in this area, we have the Benelux, the three Benelux states, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. But this central Frank kingdom is actually much bigger, because it also includes southeastern France, Burgundy here, and then the Kingdom of Italy, including Rome. So that's different from today, but we already have emerging from the same people, the Franks, the government, through the same people, we have emerging something that loosely resembles France, Germany, and what lies in between. Let's make some time travel. Let's go back to the year 814, and let's ask people in three different parts of the Frankish Empire about their identity. Let's ask a person in Paris about what he or she feels he or she is. Paris is a part of the Western Frankish Empire. On your left, the reddish part. Okay, what would the person say? Me. I'm a Neustrian, of course. Other Franks live in the east, but we have different kings. So this person doesn't mention the word Franks really. The western part is called Neustria. That's a name that's lost, but that was their identity. The person knows that there are other Franks to whom he or she is vaguely related and live far in the east, but the kings are different. They don't know anything about each other. They hardly ever meet. Then let's switch to a person in a village on the river Donau, which is it was blue on the map, the Eastern Frankish Empire, and he or she would say, I'm from Bavaria, Bayern. The Franks are related to us, but I have never seen their king or emperor. So he is from the tribe of the Bavarians, Bayern, which has been assimilated by the Franks. They have become part of the Frankish Empire, to whom they are related, but they have never seen their king or emperor. Very far away, no television, no books, no newspapers. People didn't even know what the king looked like. They probably just knew his name. And then a person from Barcelona. What was it like in Spain or in Catalonia at that time? Of course, I'm a Muslim. I live under the Caliph of Cordoba, and Allah is above all. Spain was mostly, especially in the southwest, a Muslim country. Muslim people had come from North Africa. So Spain wasn't a part of Europe at all, at least not of Christian Europe in that time. So quite different from our idea of Europe. Has the idea of Europe died together with the Roman Empire? Has the connection between people been lost? Well, not entirely. This scene shows Rome on Christmas Day in the year 800, and what do you see? You see the Pope, the head of Christianity in Western Europe, and he has a crown, and he's about to set the crown on this man's head. The man is kneeling, but he has a strong sword in his right hand. So what actually is in this picture? Well, it's the coronation of Charles the Great, or as he's called, Charlemagne, Karl der Große, Carlos Magnus, in different languages. In the year 800, Charles the Great, the king of the Franks, went to Rome, and he received from the Pope the crown. Here it is pictured, the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. So the king of the Franks became the new emperor of the Roman Empire, Shinsei Roma Teikoku, as it is called in Japanese. And you can see this picture is much later, many years later. You can see Karl or Charles with the emperor's crown. You can see the sword in his right arm, because unlike the Pope, he's actually fighting the enemies of God and the enemies of the empire. And he has this interesting thing in his left hand. It's called an orb. This is Kenkyu. This is a model of the world with a Christian cross on top. It's in the hands of the emperor. So the emperor rules the world. There can be only one emperor. That's the idea behind it. Only one emperor, and the emperor is on top of the world. This picture actually is much later, but you can see the idea already here. This is around 500 years old. You have the coat of arms of Germany and the coat of arms of France, as it was until the French Revolution. So you can see already 500 years ago, and even earlier, people saw Charlemagne, Karl der Große, as a unifying figure that brought together France and what was to become France and Germany and other European countries. There's actually a few places left reminiscent of Charlemagne, Karl der Große. In Aachen Cathedral, which is in the very west of Germany, close to Belgium and France actually, we have his throne, his imperial throne. It is this rather simple wooden seat with stairs. So he is imitating the new emperor is imitating the Roman emperors to throne, to lord above everybody else. So we have a political connection between the Roman Empire and the Middle Ages. But what about the knowledge of Greece and Rome? We talked about architecture, engineering, wine, maths, politics, many, many things. These things were common to all Europeans. They're part of European identity. But how did that survive in the Middle Ages when the Central Empire was much, much less strong? By the way, when we talk about Middle Ages, Chuseiji Jidai in Europe, we usually talk about the period 500 to 1500 AD. Who saved the knowledge of Greece? In Rome during the Middle Ages, the answer is very simple. Monks, Shudoin-san, monks saved this. All over Europe, you can still visit these monasteries, classical medieval buildings. This is an example from France, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of monastery buildings preserved. Whenever you go to Rome, have a look. And what did they do? How did the monks save the knowledge? They read books, old books, and copied books. They copied by hand. You can see here. This is called scriptorium, the room where monks read and write copy books. Or here, copying books. Wherever you look, one of the main tasks of monks was to preserve important knowledge for mankind and copy. And this is an example of a medieval copy of Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. Everything Romans and Greek, really every text they wrote is preserved through the works of monks and monasteries. There is no original text written in Roma Teikoku Jidai by Julius Caesar's scribes. Doesn't exist. The paper has rotted away. It's physically impossible, but we have medieval texts that are 500, 600, 700 years old, and this is how they wrote beautiful writing and also drew small pictures to make the pages more beautiful for those who could read. Another aspect of how the classical inheritance survived in Europe and binds together different European countries is architecture. And in this example, Christianity, Christian religion here is the main driver again. Christianity builds cathedrals, daisedo, big churches. The biggest of them all is, of course, St. Peter in Rome, home cathedral of the Pope. The second biggest church in Europe is the cathedral in Cologne at the River Rhine. But there are many other spectacular, huge buildings like Chartres in France, Toledo in Spain, Milano in Italy, Salisbury in England. You can see different national styles, but architecture-wise, except for St. Peter, all the other five are Gothic buildings built in the late Middle Ages in order to praise the Lord, to provide big halls where the faithful could assemble and worship. So the architectural styles of Gothic and Romanic before spread all over Europe thanks to Christian building activity, mostly thanks to Christian inspired building activity. And they made sure that Europe slowly became, found another identity, came back together. There were things and structures in different European countries that were the same in different countries, and the link is the Christian church. We move on to the 15th and to 17th century, really very roughly now. What is important for Europe in this period is Renaissance, artistic and scientific, academic rebirth, and then overseas expansion. The European nations start to have colonies and trade contacts all over the world. Several countries are mentioned here, and you can see from the picture on the right, this is Saint Francis Xavier, who came to Japan, a Jesuit who was very instrumental in the early Japanese mission. So the earliest contacts between Japan and Europe fall in the 16th century and also have to do with Christianity-inspired activities. Uh, all that led to the exchange of ideas and cultures. So not only Europe moved closer together, but the world moved a bit closer together. Trade in goods made countries and individuals more prosperous, more wealthy. The downside is the slave trade, which is a sin on the European common conscience. Countless Africans were moved to North and South America. And then the spirit of the Christian mission, the attempt to convert local populations to Christianity, which was not always or not everywhere successful. The 18th century is characterized in Europe by the Enlightenment, and then finally Revolution. I picked a Frenchman and a German person to illustrate this. We have here François-Marie Arouet, who actually was called as a literary person Voltaire, very, very famous philosopher before the French Revolution. He said, superstition sets the world in flames, philosophy quenches the flames. He's speaking about reason. Let's not be superstitious. Let's be reasonable. Let's look at the world with scientific eyes. And then this is the rational side. The emotional side can be found in the music of Ludwig van Beethoven. His Ninth Symphony, which is so famous, and also the hymn of the EU now. He said in the text, the chorus is singing it, all men will be brothers. We are all equal in the end. We deserve to live free. And these ideas combined led to the French Revolution in the late 18th century, which changed a lot in Europe, which paved the way to eventually, in the 20th century, the populations taking over, selecting their government. I'm talking about democracy, of course, and the European Union is, from its beginning, a project, an experiment in democracy. In the 19th century, the big change was industrialization that changes life in Europe, especially in Northern Europe, not so much in Southern Europe. If you look at Manchester in the early 19th century, just smokestacks, factories all over the place. This meant to people fleeing or leaving the countryside, leaving their villages, moving into cities. The cities get bigger and bigger, and that changes the nature of European countries, of course. Adam Smith is the creator of the idea of free trade, free enterprise. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, he wrote about the freedom of men to pursue their own interest in his way. Of course, he's talking about the economy, economic freedom. But economic freedom is as new as the idea of political freedom was when the French Revolution achieved that for a while. The 20th century, I talked about the dark side of European history, brought two world wars. European countries fought against each other with allies from across the world. In World War I, we have the Allied or Entente powers, Russia, France, Britain, Italy, then the United States, Japan also included, a number of countries who fought the Central Powers, or fewer countries, Austria, Hungary, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey that is, and Bulgaria. And in the end you have 22 million dead people on the Allied side and 60 million dead on the side of the Central Powers, which is staggering, the bloodiest war so far. And if you look at the casualties, the military and civilian deaths, I marked in blue countries that lie inside Europe, European countries, and red are countries outside of Europe. And here you see with the casualty rates, the top countries that took the largest number of deaths are almost all European. Turkey was, the Ottoman Empire was a mixed uh, uh, empire at that time. It had possessions in Europe, but also in Asia, even in North Africa, so it's mixed. And then you see, after a long list of European countries that took a heavy death toll, then there are the United States and Japan with 415 deaths in World War One. In case you wonder how that occurred, Japan entered the war on the side of Britain and had the task of taking the German colony in Qingdao in China, which it did, but the German soldiers resisted, and that resulted in a number of dead Japanese soldiers as well. So World War One is a world war, but when it comes to losses, to death, people, and destruction, it's almost entirely on Europe's expenses. It made Europe much weaker. But it got worse. World War II occurred a generation later. Again, we have allies, and then we have the Axis and Axis-aligned countries. You see, Japan and Italy have switched columns. That's the main difference here. And we have an amazing number of over 61 million dead people among allies and 12 million among the Axis. There's a discrepancy that can be easily explained if you look at the number of the Soviet Union, which lost almost 24 million people, and many of them are civilians. And then the Chinese Civil War is calculated in here, and so on and so forth. Here you see that the casualties are spread out between European and non-European countries. So World War II was, in a truer sense, a world war, but the main battlefield outside the Pacific theater was actually in Europe, and it did devastate Europe even more so than World War I did. So my question to you, what do you think? How many wars did European countries wage against each other between 1500 and 2000? 500 years of European history, how many wars did occur in Europe? Take a moment, think about it, and I will give you the number. 150 wars in 500 years. So about every 3 years there was one war in Europe. A situation that had led Europe from being the leader, the colonial leader of the world, to a country to a continent that was sandwiched between two major powers now. We will come to that in a moment. So the experience of the two world wars inspired resistance to war, pacifism, the idea, let's never again war. One example is the artist Käthe Kollwitz, and actually she has very strong anti-war images, works of art, and actually you can see her works if you have the time in Golden Week. Stop by Sakima Bijutsukan in Futenma in Ginowan. Very interesting collection and leads you into the dark ages of Europe in the first half of the 20th century. I mentioned that Europe was now sandwiched between two blocks. Well, you have it here, the small map. You have the United States and Canada, obviously here, and in orange, the Soviet Union. Europe is this small thing in between. Here you have the basic map of the Cold War, which started right after World War II ended and only ended in 1991. And you can see the Soviet Union here and countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany in the same color as the Soviet Union, whereas West Germany, France, Italy, later Spain, Britain, of course, Norway, are in the same color as in the United States, in green. So what actually had happened, in the words of Sir Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister during the war, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. With that, he is referring to this line. It goes here. I think I could draw it here. This is the Iron Curtain. It goes right here and separates also here. Oh, sorry, this is a mess. Write this. It separates Western Europe from Eastern Europe, and everything that's on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain is controlled by the Soviet Union, whereas the rest on the western side is mostly part of the Western Alliance controlled by the United States, another non-European power, with a few neutral countries like here, Switzerland, Austria in the middle. So the 1950s saw the Cold War, East-West confrontation, no hot wars, but lots of conflict, diplomatic, economic, political conflict. And it led to the foundation of the NATO that still exists, the Western Defense Alliance. It's the blue countries, the countries in blue, and also, of course, the United States plus Canada are members. So they're not on this map. And the Soviet Union answered several years later by founding the Warsaw Pact, Warsaw Treaty, which combined the red-colored countries. The third, fourth, smallest bloc in Europe were the neutral countries, non-aligned states. We have Switzerland, Austria, Sweden, Finland, Ireland, and under the dictator Franco, Spain was also a neutral country. Let's have a look inside Western Europe after World War II. There are lots of troubles. There was destruction from war, not just in the countries like Germany who lost the war, but almost everywhere. The war was fought in so many countries. The influence, we talked about that, influence of the USA and the Soviet Union had increased. There were new political systems. The countries that lost the war had been dictatorships before. Were now turned into democracies. That goes for Italy, that goes for Germany, Austria, and well, basically those. But the distrust between old enemy countries was remaining. Mind you, 150 wars had been fought in Europe in 500 years. Especially between French and German people, the atmosphere was very, very bad. There was hatred between, there was really hatred, absolute dislike between the people. So the question in around 1950 was, what should be done? We don't want war again, and we don't want to be controlled all the time by the United States or the Soviet Union. We want European control over our own affairs, and we don't want to lead any wars against each other anymore. What could be done? Well, let's think about it. Actually, I asked this as a homework in EU Kenkyu last year, and the class of 2020 came up with a number of nice ideas, which I would summarize this: improve the economy. The idea is if people are economically satisfied, they lose appetite for war and aggression because they have enough for themselves. They don't need to take it from others. Then change politics. Of course, get rid of dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, and so on. Improve inter-European relations. So have constructive relations, dialogues between governments, and possibly also between people. And for that, fourth, change education. Count on younger people who are not yet have so much prejudice and hatred for other peoples, who are young, who are still open, and show them what the other peoples of Europe are like. Of course, this was very nice. I was really very happy with what the students came up with, because this is actually a blueprint of what happened in Europe. If you look at change education, you know, Erasmus and also high school exchanges across Europe became a very, very important part of EU policy. The idea is to bring back young people early and make them understand other peoples. How did this happen? Well, first, uh, let me introduce Robert Schuman, who was a man of mixed of German and Luxembourg background, who became a French citizen, fought against the Nazis, and then was the French foreign minister in 1950. And Schuman asked one question: what to do about Germany? He said he thought the main reason for the latest big wars, World War One, Two, but also others before, was that Germany in the center of Europe was not satisfied with the political situation and turned to aggression. So what about creating a political situation that satisfies Germany as well as everybody else? Would then aggression disappear? So his idea is Europe will not be made all at once. It will be built through concrete achievement. He needs solidarity, a European spirit. The coming together of the nations of Europe requires the elimination of the age-old opposition between France and Germany. He said, he thought, we need to get rid of this conflict between France and Germany. We need to stop young Frenchmen, young Germans fighting each other every 30, 40 years. So this was the area he wanted to act on. And his idea, actually the French government's idea, Schuman's idea, was that a treaty that places the production of coal and steel under a common high authority, open to other countries of Europe, so other countries of Europe can join. What was the basic idea behind this? If you pool coal and steel production, you can control war-making abilities of countries. If you want to start a war, you first need to produce weapons and munitions, right? And in those days, in 1950, you need energy for that. Energy was mostly provided from coal to produce steel. And from steel, you can make weapons. What if the factories in Germany and in France that produce coal and steel are supervised by inspectors from the other country? If other countries can check how much coal and steel is produced, they can safely predict, they are going to prepare a war because they are ramping up production of coal and steel. So this is a very simple but very effective mechanism to control the other country's ability to make war against you. And it should be the first step in federation of Europe, according to Schuman. Very simple but highly effective plan. And was this to be the birth of a new European spirit? Yes, it was. It proved to be. It was not utopian nonsense. Remember, the Europeans after World War II, the one thing everybody in every country desired was, let's stop wars. Let's make no more wars against each other. Well, that's a characterization. The Schuman proposals are revolutionary or they are nothing. In fact, never before had something like that been proposed to control the weapons production capabilities of other countries to ensure peace. Luckily, Schuman had a partner in Germany, Konrad Adenauer, who was also not a Nazi, and he was the first chancellor of West Germany. So he was the leading political figure in Germany in 1950. And Adenauer understood Schuman's idea, and he signed up and he convinced his party and most people in Germany, that it's a good idea to move forward with that plan. And so the quotations were from the Schuman Declaration on which was here Mr. Schuman is actually reading out his declaration on May 9th in 1950. This is, by the way, is the Europe Day. This is it's considered the founding day of the European Union, so it's being celebrated every year. And that led to the Treaty of Paris about 1 year later. Here you see Schuman and you see Adenauer and the other leaders of the period. They signed the first European treaty, the Treaty of Paris, which created the so-called Europe of the Six. Of course, you can see the 6 countries here. You have France and Germany, then you have Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, the Benelux countries in between, and Italy in the south, the first countries to join. And it was not yet called European Union. The name is still decades ago. At this time, the correct term for the federation, for the bloc, is ECSC, the European Coal and Steel Community. Next step was the Treaty of Rome in 1957. The Coal and Steel Treaty was so successful, the 6 countries decided, oh, let's do more. Let's extend our cooperation to more economic sectors. So in the beginning, really, the economy was the first thing which caused European countries to get closer together. Big political, cultural, territorial, military topics were not touched upon. First, they made business with each other. This led to the EEC, the European Economic Community, the common market. It's not the single market as we know it today, but it's a common market, and it made trade between the 6 countries much easier. And here the idea to move people, goods and services more freely across borders was actually born here, but it took many more years to fully realize this. Then in 1962, agriculture was added to the mix. Joint control for the countries over food productions. So yet another economic topic, but also a topic of great social importance. Still, the European Union is paying quite a large amount of money to sustain agriculture in member countries. 1963 is the first international step the EEC is taking. They decided to provide ODA to former colonies, to countries in Africa. And now the European Union is the world's biggest provider of ODA, overseas development assistance. What's special about European ODA? It's linked to respect for human rights by recipients. That means countries can only receive European ODA money if they respect human rights, if they don't persecute political opponents, if they behave peacefully. The Europe of the 9 came to existence in this period. It includes, you can see Denmark, Great Britain and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. Inter-European trade is enhanced, cross-country trade, customs duties are eliminated. And this period ends, ends in 1973 when these 3 countries enter the EC. It's usually called European Community. EC is the name in this period. The next 5 years I have highlighted as solidarity and democracy. The European Regional Development Fund set up, which means that rich countries are to help poor countries for instance, by providing infrastructure help, roads, communications, helping create jobs. 1979 marks the first time that the European citizens across all member nations elect the members of the European Parliament directly. So a step forward towards more democratic legitimacy. The next enlargement starting in 1986 concerns Greece, and then Spain and Portugal, after they shed their dictatorships, joined in the 1980s as well, thus making it the Europe of the 12 country European community. I wrote EU, it should be EC actually here. The Erasmus program was launched in '87. University students for 1 semester or 1 year can study in another European country. It's really very easy now. Also, the credit point transfer system works really well. So far, 2 million young people have benefited. And I must admit, me too. I was in 1988. I received this help in when I did Rygaku in Great Britain. Erasmus. It wasn't called Erasmus then. It was called support from the European Union. So it's hugely beneficial. It made studying in England much easier for me. 1987 marks a huge change in Europe. The Cold War comes to the end. Of course, you know the Brandenburg Gate in the Berlin Wall, this historical picture. The Berlin Wall, the entire Iron Curtain separating Eastern Europe from Western Europe, collapsed. The Soviet bloc ceased to exist. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. It's called Russia. The country is called Russia now. And the question is for the European Union, should the European Union, which was until this time a club of Western European nations, should they accept Eastern European countries as members, new members from Eastern Europe? And the answer given was yes. We come to that in a minute. The next, we are missing something here. Yeah, okay, right. The next stage opened in 1992 with the Maastricht Treaty, which is probably, after the Treaty of Paris, the most important treaty the European Union ever signed. You can see the original. This is the treaty. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. It exists in 24 languages, and it's sealed by leaders of states and government. So it's a really important document. It contains several things. There is the plan for the euro, the future single currency, which came to life about 10 years later. Then more coordination of foreign and security policy, more cooperation in justice and home affairs, like police chasing criminals across European borders. And then finally, the name European Union, EU, is adopted and replaces the European Community. So Europe gets itself into a fit shape for the 1990s and 2000s, and also this is also part of the Maastricht movement. We already had this last week. The single market came into life after the Maastricht Treaty was signed. The 4 freedoms, the free movement of goods, of services, of people and money across Europe came into force. And here you can actually see shopping has become much easier. Sorry about the noise, not gonna take the call. Maastricht was supplemented by the Schengen Agreement. That Schengen Agreement meant no more borders between Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Portugal. Today, 28 countries are member states of the Schengen Agreement. It means that internal borders inside Europe mostly have vanished. Looks like this. Here you have the Schengen Bridge. Well, you see the bridge at Schengen over the river Mosel. And actually, Schengen is a small town on two sides of the river. The right side is in Germany, and the left side is in Luxembourg. And here you see the German foreign minister and the Luxembourgian foreign minister meeting on the bridge. There are no more border controls, just the three flags displayed there. To sum up what happened after the 1990s, you see here three maps of Europe. The European Union decided, yes, we are going to accept Eastern European countries, even though that would add only poorer countries to the European Union. It would place a challenge on the EU, which used to be a club of fairly rich countries. That would change, and you see Scandinavian countries, Finland and Sweden joined, also Austria joined, and then Eastern European countries, one group after the other. Here we have chronicled this, and in 2007 the state of affairs is that there are 27 members of the European Union. It's only one more new member to reach the peak of 28, Croatia, in 2013. However, that was the peak, as I said. In 2020, the first time ever one country left the European Union, the Great Britain, obviously, the Brexit, British exit from the European Union. Well, this is what the newspaper artists, cartoonists saw this. Of course, this is British Prime Minister Theresa May a few years ago doing a very dangerous jump because Britain also stands to lose many advantages, like the free movement of trades and goods, tariff-free trade with European countries, political support. So this is an unknown affair for Britain, and we still have no idea what the future relations between Britain and the EU will look like and how much damage the British economy will eventually take. From a European perspective, of course, losing England, Great Britain is very sad. It was a big country. Among with France and Germany, it was a member of the biggest three countries, but the journey goes on. This is Europe in 2020 as it looks now. We have the category of former member here. Of course, this is Great Britain in this. There are countries that are candidates to join. Among them are Serbia, Albania, Macedonia here on the Balkans. Potential candidates like Bosnia and Kosovo. Potential candidate means possibly joining the EU is very far away. And then there is Turkey, which used to be closer to joining the European Union 10 years ago, but under President Erdogan it has taken a very unfortunate development, which makes it rather unlikely that Turkey will join the European Union within the next 10 years or so. Roundup, matome desu ne. The themes of EU history I presented to you. First thing is make war impossible through coal and steel production controls, Treaty of Paris, 1951. Then economic cooperation and trade ever deeper, ever closer in the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Then we get the single market in 1992 after the Maastricht, according to the Maastricht Treaty, freedom of goods, services, people and money, free movement of these four, and no more internal border controls. That's the Schengen Agreement. The European Union in principle remains open for all European countries to join. You see the development from 6 countries to 28 and recently to 27 countries. with more candidate countries wishing to join. Basic principle of European EU history is democracy and rule of law. Countries must be democratic to become partners or even members of the European Union. There's a parliament that's elected and the EU Court of Human Rights to protect people from states. Solidarity is an important principle. Richer countries help poorer countries to develop. The single currency is the euro, which physically came into circulation 19 years ago. But also we have internal contradictions. The EU bloc is very big and there are very different countries in it with different interests, different policies. For instance, the refugee crisis of 2015 showed that Eastern European countries were much less prepared to accept refugees than, say, Western European countries or especially Germany. Then there was the Brexit affair, the referendum the British took to leave, and then a process that took several years to negotiate the actual exit. And well, that will conclude today's lecture. This will conclude today's lecture. The homework. Please place the European Union countries on the map. It's a challenge, your homework. Please play around, work with the European map, develop an idea which country lies where. Please self-check. You don't need to email this to me. I trust that you do this and check it by yourself. So that's the first homework. Please work with the map, self-check. Second homework, please prepare for the upcoming lectures by Miyazato Sensei. On May the 12th, she will talk about education, and then on May 19th about language policies. Miyazato Sensei will post information on web class. So please check out web class about the format in which she will deliver the lectures. Right, thank you very much for today. That's for it. I hope you had no problems following the lecture. Goodbye.